Hello everybody, I am Jmulls of Jmulls Gaming, and I've been thinking about Persona 3 a lot lately, and it just kind of feels that the more time passes since I've now beaten Persona 3 Reload, the more I've come to appreciate and adore Persona 3 on the whole. And there's quite a few Persona fans in my community, and we talk about it quite a bit on my Discord, link in the description down below, and a topic of conversation was brought up, Persona 3 FES or Reload. And I think this is one of the most interesting internet discussions about a game that we've had in the last couple of years, for a very simple reason. It kind of distills a lot of my thoughts and opinions on quite a few modern remakes of older games, and spurs about a great discussion on artistic direction and just overall narrative presentation. So let's get really nerdy today, and let's just yap and talk about Persona 3. Because I haven't played FES myself, but I've seen the cutscenes for the most part. I've played Portable, we're not going to be talking about that, but I've also played Reload. Now, I want to preface this by saying that I really like Reload. I had an amazing time with that game, and I don't want there to be any misunderstanding that what I'm about to say means that I actively dislike Persona 3 Reload or anything like that. I don't. But I can see why people don't. I can see why people don't like Persona 3 Reload, especially in comparison to FES. Because while I really do enjoy the new scenes and new character moments that are added with Reload, and I think they do add a lot that I personally wanted out of P3 for so many years that I finally got with Reload, I think Reload and FES focus on two different things. I think FES kind of focuses in on the theme of Persona 3 and really instilling that in a lot of its cutscenes, especially in the opening and especially with Makoto's Awakening. There's far more tension in those scenes. In Makoto's Awakening, you had that heartbeat sound effect throughout. Thanatos was more feral, and they just leaned into these darker, more macabre themes that they almost kind of shied away from in Reload a bit, where the scenes are a bit more bright, the animation style is fundamentally different, and a lot of these scenes just hit in a different way. Not necessarily worse, but I think they're targeting different elements. As I said, FES is kind of trying to hone in on the overall theme of Persona 3. That being death, understanding death, it being scary, but coping with it, accepting it, and choosing to live life to the fullest. And if you're the type of person that really likes analyzing a theme about a story, FES may be more up your alley than Reload. Because, in my opinion, what Reload really focuses in on are the characters. I watched a side-by-side of Makoto's Awakening from FES to Reload, and in FES it was far more tense, it was darker, it was even, dare I say, more scary. But in Reload, it's more epic, more kind of upbeat and adrenaline-filled, and brighter, because for some reason, in Reload, they feel the need to make the Dark Hour shockingly bright and shockingly green. Like you got the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle color filter over the entire screen or something. And I think this is best shown for Reload based on what it added to, well, P3. Those additional scenes with the characters. Those extra storylines we got with all the characters, especially the guys, because they didn't have social links in the original versions of P3. We get those nighttime hangouts, watching movies, cooking dishes, doing whatever. There's a lot of additional stuff, and dare I say, even in the cutscenes of P3, there's a bit more focus on the characters, not so much as on the horror elements of P3 and the darker elements in regards to death. Obviously, it's still the P3 story, so there is a focus on it. It's just some of that focus is shifted away from those thematic elements, more so on hyping up the characters and focusing in on the characters specifically rather than the theme. So I think, naturally, like if you're someone who really loves thematic storytelling and breaking down the theme of a story, you may prefer FES in this regard. If you are someone who absolutely loves characterization, character development, and those kind of character moments, you may be someone who prefers Reload. There's another element here that I want to talk about, and that is Persona 3 Reload's use of those 3D cutscenes. Especially early on in the game with the intro and when Makoto awakens his persona. In FES, they were part of the anime cutscenes, but in Reload, they use the 3D cutscenes that pretty much look like the in-game character models. And I think, again, what you prefer here will come down to your own preference and what you just want out of a story. Because when it comes to Reload, sure, I think when you look at side-by-side comparisons between FES scenes and these Reload scenes, the FES scenes hit harder. They're more tense, they're more dark, and I think the pacing can elicit more emotion. But there's something to be said about using the in-game models for these cutscenes, and it could help that over time, it builds on this kind of consistency, because it puts the emotion of the scenes into these character models specifically. And there's a bit of a lesser disconnect between the regular game and when you have an anime cutscene. I think it leads to those FES cutscenes looking more visceral and cool, but in Reload I think it can lead to this feeling of consistency that you're not always being bombarded in a big story moment with this giant anime cutscene. You get a lot of these cutscenes using the in-game character models. It's an interesting storytelling device, and I think that works to Reload's strength, in that they're used to the 3D models, and pretty much the in-game models for these cutscenes puts the storytelling and the emotion and the gravitas of what's going on onto these character models, so it could be Reload's way of trying to, again, focus a little bit more so on the characters and the characterization of Persona 3, rather than the overall theme and thematics going on with P3, because I think those original FES cutscenes do a better job of that, whereas you could make the argument that in the long run, what they're trying to do with Reload and with these cutscenes, and using these character models in these cutscenes and in these big signature moments, is put the emotion and put the investment into these character models, forming the connection in the player's brain, because you're seeing and playing with them all the time, that it's the character. You have that connection, you have that, again, consistency. And I think it's really interesting that these games focus on these different elements, because you have that age-old question when it comes to a remake of a game: do you do it one for one, or do you go for changes? Because if you do a one-for-one remake, outside of simply looking better, what new thing are you bringing to the table to excite people in regards to that thing? Now, for a game that is not widely available in the modern day like Persona 3 FES, there's going to be a lot of people out there, not just those people, but also more traditionalists, who want that traditional Persona 3 experience. I'm not saying they're wrong, that's just what they want. And then you're going to have other people out there that have seen that before, that have played that before, that want something new and fresh. And after I personally played Persona 3 Portable, my biggest takeaway from that game was that I wanted more character moments. I wanted more scenes with the characters to iron out the pacing issues that I had in the first half with Persona 3. Reload got me that. And that was the thing I really started to realize in regards to how I felt about Persona 3 the more and more I played Reload. I was starting to fall in love with it far more. And it went from kind of the Persona game I didn't care about as much as P4 and P5, and then it became, hey, this is right up there with them for me. And now when I'm looking back on my favorite moments in all of Persona, a lot of those come from P3, and that's because of Reload. I still think Persona 3 Reload is a great game. I do. Is it perfect? No. I kind of ran out of things to do for the most part in the game by December. Not fully, but like mostly. And funnily enough, here's another good little example to showcase that FES relies more so on theme rather than Reload, which focuses more on characterization and characters. Tartarus. Remember the fatigue mechanic. For those who may not be aware, and if you only played games like Portable or you only played Reload, in the older versions of Persona 3, like the original and in FES, there was this fatigue mechanic. It's there a little bit in the later games, but it's been completely retooled and kind of gutted. Pretty much what would happen is, the more you played in Tartarus with a specific party, those characters got tired, right? Makes sense. You're climbing a seemingly endless tower. That would take a toll on anyone, and it takes a toll on the characters, and eventually they just become too tired. So if you go back to the lobby to save, they say, look, that's gonna be it for me for the night, and they just leave. It's a system meant to incentivize using multiple different characters the farther you get into the game, but also tackling Tartarus not all at once, but in piecemeal. So you tackle a bit of it here and there, then, hey, all my party members are gone, I can either try and do this by myself like an idiot, or I can go back, rest up, and come back to Tartarus another night throughout this full moon cycle. And if you want to get really nerdy, like it's an English class or something, we can break that down thematically. That Tartarus is supposed to represent life itself. You tackle some challenges, but you get tired and you need to take a break, you need to take a rest, / a vacation, whatever, go do some other things. You come back, you tackle more challenges, you climb higher and higher in Tartarus, but you never know when the end is, / death. You never know when that is. And at the end of the game, all of a sudden, you're at the end of Tartarus. That's it. And the game pretty much ends not long afterwards. That theme still holds in Reload, but like what we talked about before, where it's kind of taking, if you view the storytelling as a pie, in FES, a lot of that pie is dedicated to theme, at least in my opinion, and it still focuses on characters to some degree. It's just the emphasis is more so on the theme. But in Reload, it's a larger chunk of that pie that's relegated for characterization now, and less so towards theme. It's still there, just to a lesser degree. Think about Tartarus and Reload now. That fatigue mechanic, largely kind of gone, and you're largely incentivized to do all of Tartarus in a full moon section in one night. That way you can use the rest of your nights for any other activities, like leveling up your social stats, or hanging out with members of C's, or doing the social links, whatever. You have quite a few activities in the early game at night. So instead of doing Tartarus in each of the full moon cycles in chunks and in little bits at a time, or at least being incentivized to do that, now you're incentivized just to do it all at once. So you still get the break from Tartarus, right? To represent going through life's challenges, going up Tartarus as a tower, then taking a break for a bit. You still get that to a lesser degree, though. Because now, instead of getting that cycle throughout a full moon cycle, now the full moon cycle is supposed to, like, represent one of those cycles, where you do all the floors of Tartarus that you have available, you get to the break, you leave, rest up in the overworld, do whatever. Next full moon cycle, you come back fresh and recharged. You still retain that overall theme with Tartarus, but now it's more so focused on characterization. Think of Theurges. I love the Theurge mechanic in Reload, and does a great job of injecting character and characterization into the combat and into the gameplay. But it's kind of funny, right? How they chose to focus on that instead of retaining the old flow of Tartarus. I personally don't mind that, because, personally speaking, I'm not that big of a fan of the idea of the fatigue mechanic, though I imagine it wouldn't be an overall detriment to me. Like, my bigger issue would be I want to be able to control my party members. That's a complete other discussion. Though I think you could make an argument that that is how FES chooses to showcase the characterization of the characters in combat, is that you don't directly control them. You can kind of guide them to overall what you want them to prioritize, but at the end of the day, the choice to what mechanic they use is their prerogative, which you could argue showcases the characterization of those characters in the gameplay. Reload instead gives you the option of direct control, but also has Theurgy, which I really like, and the Theurgy mechanics and the way you generate them are unique to each character and kind of lean into the story of those characters. And you may be going, well, Jmulls, one of those things is way better than the other. But again, that kind of goes back to that previous point, where it's more so about what you, as the player and as the consumer, prefer. Do you prefer the thematic elements in the gameplay and in Tartarus and in the cutscene direction in FES? Or do you prefer having more autonomy? Do you prefer them focusing a bit more so on the characters and making them really likable and lovable, and focusing in on their stories? Not that FES doesn't, just a bit more in Reload. Then you may prefer how Reload does it. Or you may prefer a bit of each. If you ask me, I kind of prefer the gameplay of Reload, but when I look at the cutscenes I see in FES, I prefer those. Because I like that those cutscenes lean into those horror elements. Really leaning into the thematic story of Persona 3, that being death. And death is scary. So, to really highlight that and showcase it kind of on the nose, they make the Dark Hour really spooky. And I think Reload takes away from that feeling a bit, and a bit too much in my opinion. Like its heavy emphasis of green. Some may like that, but I'm just saying personal preference here. I think in regards to the lighting specifically when it comes to Reload, especially during the Dark Hour, and mainly just during the Dark Hour, it does kind of suffer from the modern remake syndrome, where they feel the need to make everything so blindingly bright, especially compared to like what came before. This was really showcased in the Halo anniversaries, mainly with Combat Evolved, where a lot of those scenes and the horror elements that those early Halo games had was kind of thrown away for the most part, mainly with Combat Evolved, when it came to the remakes that came down the line. They just made everything bright as hell. That happens to a degree in Reload, and I do wish they didn't do that specifically, but when it comes to the cutscenes, when it comes to a lot of those elements, I can understand why they're like that in Reload, because Reload is trying to focus in on the characters a little bit more so than the themes, whereas FES and those original versions of P3 were largely focusing more so on the theme in comparison. And I think that's where we see the sentiment that Persona 3 Reload is Persona 5 with a P3 skin, or whatever, however you want to call it. Because while P5 has really strong themes, that game absolutely does focus a lot on the characterization and focuses more so on being hype rather than being scary, because P5 isn't a horror game. P3, to some degree, had horror elements. I wouldn't call it like Amnesia or whatever, but like in those early cutscenes in the Dark Hour, yeah, it was pretty spooky. So yeah, I think with that, I'll call the video there for the day. I love getting nerdy about storytelling and stories overall, especially when it comes to games like this, and especially when it comes to games that I love as much as I do Persona, and now Persona 3. But I also want to hear what you think. Which version do you prefer, Persona 3 FES or Persona 3 Reload, and why? I'd love to hear your thoughts and hear your opinions, and even if you prefer Persona 3 Portable for whatever reason. Look, I'm not going to judge you. Stay safe, have a great day, and I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye, everybody. Until we meet again.